Support for Conversations Live comes from the members of WPSU and from the Environmental Programming Endowment.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On. I'm Ann Danahy. This spring, more than ever, gardening is a place many of us are turning to for relaxation, enjoyment, and a way to stock the pantry with homegrown fruits and vegetables. As we face the COVID-19 pandemic, we at WPSU are working to bring you information that's helpful and reliable. Tonight, that means answering your questions about gardening on everything from growing healthy vegetables to caring for flowering trees. To help us do that and share tips on making this a great growing season, we have two gardening experts. Let's meet our guests. John Esslinger is a Penn State Extension horticulture educator. He works with fruit and vegetable growers and in greenhouse production. His areas of expertise include fruit and vegetable production. Tom Butzler is a Penn State Extension horticulture educator as well. He works with commercial horticulture operations and the landscaping community in Clinton County. His areas of expertise are vegetable production and beekeeping. You too can join tonight's conversation. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242. Our email address is connect@wpsu.org. John and Tom, thank you so much for joining us remotely.
Hi, Ann.
John, can you start us off by giving us a snapshot of how the growing season is going so far? So it seemed like we were off to a head start, had a little bit of warm weather, and then the next thing you know, we've got snow in some parts of central and north central Pennsylvania. How's it going?
It's been a challenging year. Like you said, it started out really nice. Everybody anticipated we're going to have a really early season. I actually put some things in my garden a little bit early, anticipating the warm weather was going to stay. And then, like you said, it turned cold. It was hard on things. Some of the early crops that did get into the garden kind of turned some, unusual colors just because of the stress of the cold. But I think now the days are getting a little bit longer. I'm noticing my garden, the things that were looking rough are starting to look a little bit better. So we're hopeful it's going to get better from here on out.
Right, we're getting a little spring rain, right? Tom, yes. What are you seeing?
Pretty much the same thing John is seeing. Those early season crops, onions, some of the cold crops planted, they were kind of set back a little bit, but I know my onions in the garden, they're really looking pretty good right now.
So, Tom, for someone who is looking at growing a vegetable garden, maybe for the first time, we've seen a lot of interest in that right now. What tips would you have for them? If you've got a yard, you've got a lawn maybe, and you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a great place to grow some vegetable garden, what would you suggest they start with?
Sure, yeah, there is a lot of interest in starting a garden. I'm seeing it in my hometown of Jersey Shore. And so a lot of folks are looking at their yard and partitioning off a portion of that yard, turning it into a garden. So one of the things you're going to have to do is get rid of that grass, that sod. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. I mean, the quickest way to do that would be use a herbicide, spray that over the grass and kill that. And then you still might have to kind of peel back some of that sod to get down to that soil line. If you're not in a rush, I mean, you could put some black plastic over that grass. This would be a good organic way to do that. Put some black plastic over that grass. And if that's a big if we get some sunny days, that sun and that heat that's generated under that black plastic will cook that grass and kill it. So then you could put your garden in there. The other way you could do that is just to let that grass pretty much stay in place, not remove it at all, and build one of these raised beds. You can use some timbers, stone, something to build up a little bit the sides of the garden, and then in the interior of that build-up area, you place some soil and compost mixed together, and then you have your garden bed.
Okay,
so it works really well.
Some different options. Okay, well, it looks like we already have a question. So we have this question, and it is from Abby in State College. And Abby says, I have a grass bulb growing all throughout my lawn. It does not smell like onion. It has no smell. It hasn't flowered. Do you know what it is? I don't remember seeing it last year. Okay, we have a picture of it. So it kind of looks like an onion grass, but she's saying it doesn't have the smell and it's going all over the yard. Any thoughts on what that might be and what could be done to get rid of it?
Yeah, that really does look like wild onion. And I think the easiest way to do that, if it's in some small patches, is to dig that up. Just repeatedly mowing it, it's just going to send up new growth, because you saw those bulbs there. Those bulbs look pretty well. I mean, they're a nice size, so they were more than a year, I believe. But yeah, to me that looks like wild onion. John, what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, so that can spread pretty easily too, right?
It can spread. I mean, it's not going to be fast like you would see with dandelions, for an example, which, once those go to seed, those seeds just blow all over. But just getting a hand trowel and digging up that area and getting rid of those bulbs, because if you try to pull it up, what I've done in my experience, you try to pull those bulbs up. If they're well established, you'll pull up the green part of that plant, but those bulbs are remaining in the soil, and there's so much energy reserve there underneath that soil line that they'll send up new growth, and you got the same problem.
So you're not really taking care of it. Okay, well, we hope that helps, Abby. Thanks for your question. So just going back to the question again, so you've got a new gardener, so those are some different options Tom gave us for starting it. Are there advantages or disadvantages, John, from your point of view, on either having a raised bed or just doing it right in the ground?
The big advantage to a raised bed is if you have wet or heavy soil. A lot of times you get these rainy periods and things stay wet, and your plants don't do well because they just don't like that heavy saturated soil. So a raised bed will allow for drainage, and the plants will just do better. It's a little bit warmer in the spring, so as things start to get going, plants in a raised bed will do better early. The other thing, and this is kind of something you kind of realize as you get older, is a raised bed, you don't have to bend over so far. And so there's some advantage to that, and maybe a little bit of advantage with rabbits, things like that also. But they're not for everybody. And if you're doing it on a large scale, maybe it's not a great fit, but you might want to just try some, on a smaller scale, see how you like it, and then go from there.
Right. I've seen even those raised beds, which aren't just a few inches off the ground, they're almost standing height. So yeah, very convenient.
I do have some of our master gardeners have tried those, and they love them. Now it's expensive to put in because you've got to kind of fill that box, but once they have them, they just can't say enough good about it.
One thing you do have to be aware of though with raised beds, Ann, is that when we get into the middle of the summer and we get some of those really hot days, they tend to dry down a little quicker than if you were planting in kind of a level plain. So that's something that you just have to be a little more careful of as we go into the deep into the growing season.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Tom, if you do go the herbicide route and you use that to kill the grass, how long do you have to wait before you can get your veggies in?
Well, if you use something like some of these systemic products, I mean, it takes a week for them to, one, be absorbed through the vegetation and then kill the plant. So, after that growth is dead, typically folks are going to remove that sod layer so that they can expose that soil, kind of mix it up with some compost and plant in. I mean, you don't have long to wait, week and a half before, that activity kills the vegetation.
Okay, so that's not too bad.
No.
Another option is if you have a patio garden, maybe you don't have a big yard. And John, I'm thinking, are all vegetables and herbs and everything going to be okay in more of a patio garden if you're trying to do it just in a pot?
A lot of them will, and you'll see in the vegetable catalogs that there's specific varieties that are actually bred for like patio situations. They tend to be smaller, more condensed. Sometimes their fruit's a little bit smaller, but the flavor's there, pretty good. And again, kind of like what Tom was saying with the raised beds, a patio plant needs a lot of water. We were moving one year and I had a tomato in a pot and a full-size plant. And I was shocked at how much water it took. I'd water it before I went to work in the morning and it'd be dried down, wilted by the afternoon. So watch those plants, but yes, they can do well in pots. And for a lot of people, that's a great option if they don't have a yard to put a garden in.
How much sun, if you're just starting out and you're looking at a garden, either a patio garden or a full garden in your yard, how much sunlight do you need to have for your garden to do well, Tom?
Well, you're going to need sunlight. I mean, we have very few vegetables that are going to grow well in the shade. So I would say at least a half day of sun. And then, even if it's getting some shade, maybe there's a nearby tree. If it's maybe you can limb up a couple of those limbs, take some of the lower limbs off so it's not dense shade, it's a very light shade. But you're going to need several hours of sunlight to get the most out of your vegetable garden, because when they go into flower and they're producing these fruits, they need those leaves to produce that that material that's going down into the fruits, going into the fruit. So yeah, several hours.
It looks like we have a caller, and we have a call from Edward in Hopewell. Hi, Edward. Thank you for calling. What can we help you with?
I'm calling for my husband, Edward. He would like to know, we have bins we had gotten from the state, put compost in. And he's wondering, can we put soda, like ginger ale, root beer, whatever? And we put that, do we dare put that in the bins with the other composting material?
Okay, great question. So composting, what's okay and what's not okay, Tom, in your compost? Ginger ale and root beer?
Nah, I would kind of shy away from that. Really, with your compost, you're looking at your kitchen waste and your yard waste. And when I say kitchen waste, that would be like banana peels, eggshells, apple cores, things like that. But you want to avoid things that contain meats, sugars, fats. They don't work well with a backyard compost setup. So you want some green material in there, grass clippings, your banana peels, but you also need some dry material in there. Your leaves, dried leaves, sawdust, maybe chopped up cardboard, kind of mix that together. But the idea of putting ginger ale or root beer in there, it kind of has some sugar, you're going to attract wildlife, and that's the big problem. Then you're going to have these things come into your compost, start rooting around, and it can be kind of messy. So yeah, just food waste and avoid like meats, fats, things like that.
Fruit and veggie scraps. What about paper, cardboard, newspaper if you don't have leaves this time of year?
Yep, that will work fine. That will feel fine. The only caution there is that instead of putting in big chunks of cardboard, that you kind of break them up, tear them up into smaller pieces so that they're easier to break down. There's a lot of microorganisms that will be in that compost doing their thing. And so if they have more surface area to be active on.
Okay, all right, great question. We hope that helps. And I think we have a call from Sue in State College. Hi, Sue. Thanks for...
Hi there.
Hi, what's your question?
My question is, I've had an asparagus bed for the last 13 years, and it seems the last several years the spears are getting thinner and thinner. And I've had a soil test done 3 years ago. I was going to get one this year, but of course they're closed. And I'm wondering what I can do to rejuvenate the bed.
Okay, so her asparagus aren't as happy. John, any thoughts on that, what she might want to do?
Okay, yeah, and assuming that everything was done with the soil test asked for, again, fertilizer is important, having those plants healthy, and be careful too. Sometimes we get a little bit greedy with our asparagus and we pick it too long into the summer. Typically what we recommend is about a 6-week harvest window. And, at the end of that 6 weeks, even though you still want some asparagus, you need to stop, let the ferns grow up. And that's where they're putting the energy back to make the spears for next year. And so take care of those ferns. There are some insects that may get in there and start to feed on the ferns. And that's all going to show up the next year in the size of the spears. So, take good care of it the year before, and then you'll have a good crop the next year.
Well, we hope that helps, Sue. And we have a call now from Robert in Lewistown. Hi, Robert. What can we help you with?
Yeah, my concern is last year I put up or started with 2 beehives. They did well, and they both had set up quite a fair amount of honey up in the second neighbor. And then we had some warm days, I guess sometime in the middle of December. And I kind of took a look around, and suddenly all of the bees in both of the hives are dead. And they basically didn't touch any of the honey. And is there anything I would really need to do before I would attempt to try to open up the hive, to put in a couple of new nukes to continue trying to raise bees?
To try that again? Well, we have a beekeeping expert here. Tom, any suggestions?
Yeah, we could take up the rest of the show on beekeeping and problems and issues with it. But it sounds like you had enough food to get through the winter. But since the 1980s, there's been a problem with the honeybees, and this is a tiny little mite. It's called the Varroa Mite, and that, to me, that has been the biggest problem with keeping bees. Pennsylvania, every year we lose anywhere from 33 to 50% of our hives. So we'll see how it turns out this year. But the Varroa mite and controlling that mite is pretty critical to trying to maintain that colony through the winter and into the spring. One of my suggestions, and it's pretty complicated, understanding the life cycle, the treatment options. One of my suggestions is, well, two. One is to maybe contact the local beekeeping club. We have many of these throughout the state, and they usually have monthly meetings. Now, they're probably not occurring now because of the COVID-19 situation, but it's a great place to pick up information. The other comment is that Penn State is offering a free online course called Beekeeping 101. It takes about 6 hours to get through. And we talk about, the biology of the honeybee, some of the diseases, the Varroa mite, some other issues, and it might give you a basic understanding of some of these problems and get you through the next winter. So I encourage you to take advantage of that while it's still free.
Well, we hope that helps and you have better luck with your bees in the upcoming season. If you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On WPSU. Joining us tonight are Penn State Extension horticulture educators Tom Butzler and John Esslinger. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and we're ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. So we've been talking a little bit about the growing interest in gardens. Sorry, no pun intended there. Penn State Extension was actually offering a course for gardeners, and it was kind of harkening back to what was done during World War I and World War II, the Victory Garden. John, what can you tell us about the idea behind the Victory Garden?
Yeah, historically, the Victory Garden the idea was that people could get involved in the war effort by producing food for themselves, which then freed up food that could be used to feed the troops and support the war effort. So we're kind of going back to that. We're kind of with the coronavirus, we're kind of feeling like we're under attack. And so there's a lot of people interested this year in growing some of their own food. It's something you can do at home. And there's a lot of, both social, emotional, and just health benefits to getting out in our gardens.
Right, along with getting the fruits and vegetables out of it, you also kind of get the fun, it's good stress relief. Is that what you find, Tom, when you're out in your garden?
Heck yeah. I got a couple kids and a wife, and so it's a good chance to just get away from everything. And of course, the news that's going on. So it's a good chance to just go out, pull some weeds. It's kind of mindless. You don't have to do much thinking or, what other garden activity you're doing out there. So I find it personally very relaxing and just being outside.
Being very rewarding too. So for people who want to get going with their garden, what is good to plant right now? Is this a good time to plant lettuce and peas? Is the weather good for that right now, John?
Yes, if you haven't gotten those in, now's a good time to do that. A lot of times this time of year, it's starting to get warm, and lettuce and peas, spinach, those crops like it cooler. But the way the weather's been in the forecast for the next week or so, is to stay cool. So those crops will like that. They'll get off to a good start. It is a little bit early to start thinking about some of the warm season tomatoes, peppers, things like that. But those cool season crops, they can go in now. They'll take off right away, and they'll do really well. So we do have an opportunity now.
That's a good time for that. Okay, we have another question, and this one is an email. And we have a question from Rocky, and he says, I have a community garden plot, and I had California poppies growing there for years. I would love to take some and transplant them to my home. Although I've tried several times to dig some of them up and transplant them, they always die. Is there some secret to doing this successfully? Is there a trick with poppies? Either one of you a poppy expert?
No, I'm not. And John, I'm going to ask you this question: Are California poppies, are those annuals?
I'm not sure, Tom.
Yeah, I'm not.
I do know that they're fussy. They are particular as far as where they're at, and but yeah, I'm no expert on poppies. Yeah.
So maybe instead of, I'm not sure either, but one of the things you could do, maybe collect some seed and just start from seed, and you may be able to bypass that tricky transplant issue.
Yeah, those are beautiful flowers. So we wish you the best of luck with that, Rocky. And we also have a call from Perry in State College. Hi, Perry. Thank you for calling. What can we help you with?
Well, I have an apple tree question.
Okay.
Just how much fertilizer is needed? Is that required to get it to flower? I have some trees that are trellised, actually. And one flowers, one has not flowered, and a newer plant. I have it should be flowering by this time. I'm just wondering how much fertilizer is necessary.
Great question. John, how much fertilizer for an apple tree?
I'm a little bit concerned about connecting the fertilizing and the flowering. They should be flowering, even if they are under fertilized, they should still be flowering. So I think there's something else going on there. The the rule of thumb is the more dwarfing the tree is, so a dwarf will flower younger than, say, a bigger tree. So I'm not sure how old those trees are. That might be part of why one's flowering, one's not. But there might be something else going on there. A good idea to look at your trees and say, is it getting enough fertility? Is look and see how much growth you get each year. If you're getting a foot to 2 feet of growth, of new growth each year, then that tree's in good shape. It's happy. If you're seeing a lot less than that, those new shoots are only getting 4 or 5 inches long, then that's an indication that you need to bump it up. Obviously, a soil sample would be a good place to start with all this. Make sure the nutrients are balanced. Make sure your calcium is good. But I think the flowering is probably, there's something else going on there.
Okay, and do you know our soil samples, is that something that you can have done right now, or are those on hold?
The Ag Analytical Service is working, but the problem is extension offices are closed. Some counties, there are other ways to get soil test kits, whether it's a store, a gardening store that is carrying them, but maybe leave a message at your extension office and maybe somebody can get back to you as far as a place you might be able to get a soil test kit. Here, for example, in my area, that the local Agway has them.
Okay, well, we hope that helps. And we have another question, and this is from Donna in Johnstown. Hi, Donna. What can we help you with?
Well, I've had a rhubarb plant at my house that came with the house, and we've been here for 40 years. And it has always done really well. But I'd say in the last maybe 3 years, it is not doing that well. This year, I only have 2 stalks coming up, and I don't know. I've never really done anything different. I don't know if there's something I'm doing or not doing or has it just had it after 40 years?
Okay, well, that's a great question. Tom, do you have any insight into that?
I guess 2 comments on that. One, it's kind of along the same line that what John was talking about with the asparagus, that you can get a little overzealous on harvesting the rhubarb. At some point you have to stop harvesting, let it completely vegetate, grow out, and those leaves get enough energy for next year's growth. The other thing is that, both asparagus and rhubarb do kind of have a lifespan. At some point, they are going to kind of age out and tail off on how productive they are. So when you say, been around, I think you said 40 years?
I think you did, yeah.
That's pretty long. And so that could be part of the problem. And I guess the third thing, it is a perennial. So I'm just wondering, maybe to rejuvenate it, if you go in and divide it, and then maybe go from 1 plant to 2 plants, that might be able to rejuvenate it a little bit and increase the productivity.
Okay, well, we hope that helps, Donna. Thank you for calling. And we have another call, and this one is from Tim in Huntingdon. Hi, Tim. Thanks for calling, and what can we help you with?
Well, I have a question. Can you tell me, can you plant different vegetable seeds in the same row of a garden?
Different vegetable seeds in the same row, so kind of mixing it up. John, is that okay?
Absolutely. And as long as you give them all the room that they need. You can't put them too close. Sometimes people will maybe plant tomatoes and lettuce together, knowing that as the tomato plant grows, they'll harvest the lettuce. And so they kind of took advantage of that space for that time being. But give everything its due space and they'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that answers your question. And we have a call from Kate in State College. Hi, Kate. Thank you for calling. And what can we help you with?
Hi, thank you. I hope you can help me. I'm calling about groundhogs. I have 2 raised beds behind my townhouse here in a neighborhood, and groundhogs went over the edge and ate the stuff. So then I have a system where I put up in the summer above the raised bed on the edge, rising above the edge, hardware cloth. And they climb over the hardware cloth and get in there to eat. So it's a constant struggle. Now, there are neighbors in other places in the neighborhood that have raised beds that have floating row cover hoops over their raised beds, and I say to them, how do you keep the groundhogs out? And they say, groundhogs? What groundhogs? So I'd like to know, what you can suggest to me. If I hang floating row covers from my hardware cloth? What can I do? Is there anything that I can do to keep them out?
Okay, that's a great question, a groundhog challenge, and I'm sure lots of people have these types of problems. Tom, any thoughts on that? Where do you start?
I'd ask her neighbor if she's got a dog or something and see what's going on there. But yeah, so, you're trying to create a barrier basically. And so that barrier is going to have to be not only vertically above the ground, but you're going to have to put a little bit below the ground because they will tunnel, they will get underneath. But it sounds like maybe if they're climbing over, the idea of maybe trying to have a higher vertical barrier there could be a possibility.
Would it be possible maybe to have a roof almost, some type of wire fencing roof?
It could be. Maybe that but that row cover is acting as a deterrent with their neighbors. So if she could have the hardware cloth going up a little bit and then covering it with the row cover, it would be enough of a deterrent for that groundhog.
Maybe go bug some other neighbors. John, any other thoughts on getting rid of the groundhogs, keeping them out?
No, the only thing I can say is I can sympathize. Actually, this morning a grower told me that a groundhog chewed through the plastic in his greenhouse. In the greenhouse.
Well, good luck with that, and just keep trying until you figure out the right solution for it and a way to keep them out. And we have another call, and this is from Loretta in Somerset. Hi, Loretta. Thank you for calling, and what can we help you with?
I have a question about a mason bee house. What do we do with the tubes, and when do we do it?
Okay, so a bee question, Tom. Yeah,
unfortunately, I don't keep mason bees, or I don't have them around the house. It's my understanding, and John works a little bit with the orchards, maybe with these insects, but I think those tubes either need to be cleaned out or disposed of, and then new ones brought into those houses. But I'm not really sure. John, if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, the other thing I will, you have to watch. There are some other wasps, things like that, that'll actually feed on those larvae that are in the tubes. So, the mason bees are only out for a short time in the spring. So think of it, that they're used a lot for apples. So watch the apple trees, see when the apple trees are blooming. About the time that the apple trees are done blooming, they're done. They've laid their eggs, they've sealed them up, and that's it for the year. You need to put some kind of screen or some kind of protective around those straws to make sure that predators don't get in there and kill them. But and it's I do have growers that have used them successfully. And it does, you always want to be putting up some new so they can expand maybe you had places for maybe there was 50 holes, maybe for this new year, you need to have 100. Just always give them room to expand. And then once you have them, and I tried it, and I just slowly over time lost them. And the growers explained to me that, you've got to protect them. Once those larvae are in the straws, protect them somehow with some type of screening. And then again, be ready early in the spring to put them out again, let them go through their life cycle.
Okay, so some great suggestions there. We hope that helps. And if you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On WPSU. Joining us tonight are Penn State Extension horticulture educators Tom Butzler and John Esslinger. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and we're ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. So I think we already have another question. We've got a lot of gardeners who are ready to go this year, and this one is from Dan in Altoona. Hi, Dan. Thank you for calling, and what can we help you with?
Hi, guys. I hope you guys are staying safe and happy right now. I actually just had a question about my local garden. So I live in Altoona. There's a little bit of city space going on right now where I live, and I wanted to actually start raising some bees to help pollinate my yard and vegetables in my yard. So I'm just wondering if they had any tips or tricks of actually starting a little beehive, not huge or industrial size by any means, but just something that will just help the environment out as far as getting stuff pollinated and, just maintaining something for my little baby boys. I have a 2- and a 4-year-old, and just hoping to get them interested in nature.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so Tom, what tips do you have for a new beekeeper?
Well, I'm not. Was he talking about keeping bees, or it almost sounds like he's talking about pollinators? I mean, keeping bees is one thing, and you're going to have to buy the equipment or get directions or plans on how to make some of this equipment, and then buy some bees in and so forth. So there's a little bit of expense there. But the other thing is there's a lot you can do around your yard, your landscape, to encourage our native pollinators. We like to keep our yards and landscapes really tidy looking in the spring, but leaving some of those dried seed heads or stalks from last year's plants up. That we do have these native solitary bees that will nest in those or reside in them over the winter. So keeping some of that material in place, not using pesticides around the house, so that it's not yes, it's targeting a pest, but sometimes it interferes with our native pollinators. So there's things you can do to encourage some of our native solitary bees, or you could go the route of starting a beehive. And again, I encourage you to look at some of the local bee clubs. They are a wealth of information. They're great places to learn. And then, as I mentioned before, there is an online free class that Penn State's offer for Beekeeping 101.
Okay, so great suggestions. We hope that helps you get started. And we have a call. This one is from Dennis in Phillipsburg. Hi, Dennis. Thank you for calling. What can we help you with? Hi, Dennis. Can you hear us? We're having a little trouble hearing you.
Hi.
Hi, Dennis.
Thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it. I have a question concerning cuttings of hardwoods, I would call it. Acer pomatum, which is Japanese maple. And then the other one is Rhododendron maximum. That's the native rhododendron in Pennsylvania. And I'd like to find out what you guys would recommend. We have mature ones. They look like they would be perfect candidates for doing some snipping off of their shoots and put root hormone powder on them and put them in the soil, which I've tried before to no success. So that's the question. How do I get some success?
Okay, John, any thoughts on what he can do to be more successful with starting those new cuttings?
Tom, you might want to jump in here, but I think the timing is important. The other thing is when you do a cutting like that, it's very important that you minimize the stress on it. And so what you might want to do is maybe remove a few of the leaves just so you don't have you realize there's no root system there, so you have a lot of leaf tissue. So to try to keep that in balance from killing the plant, you can remove some of those leaves. Again, try to find a partly shaded area, something that tends to be a little more moist. Again, trying to relieve the stress on those.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion there, John. Not suggestion, but a recommendation. I guess the other comment, and I don't have my reference material in front of me, but every plant, you take these cuttings at different times. You mentioned hardwood, and off the top of my head, I don't know if that is the correct one for a rhododendron, but some of them are also softwood cuttings. So softwood or hardwood. And then the other thing is, and they've done the research on this, is just the different levels of hormones. The rooting compounds. So they've got it kind of down to a science. So if you can pull up some reference material, and I do have that material handy, if we can get your contact information later, we can give you the specifics for rhododendron and some of the other plants that you were talking about.
Okay, so there's some great advice there. And we have another question, and this one is an email, and we have a question from Nalene. I have a problem with moss taking over my yard, especially under my pin oak trees. Every year I use lime on my lawn, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. In some areas I rake out the moss, there's nothing left but dirt. The soil seems very compacted. Would gypsum be of benefit? John or Tom, any suggestions on dealing with moss? I know that can be a real struggle, right? We'll let John take that.
Yeah, the first thing that jumps out from that question is it's the grass underneath the tree. So grass needs the sunlight to really do well and compete. And it just might be a situation where the grass isn't going to do well. And if the grass isn't going to cover the ground, something is, and it's going to be, in this case, the moss. So it's kind of an uphill battle because you don't have a good environment for the grass to do well. Again, Tom mentioned earlier about maybe limbing some trees, trying to get some more light down through that area. And that just depends on what your priorities are. If the grass is a priority, then that might be an option for you. Her idea that she's putting lime on, making sure that the soil pH is good, that's wise. I think you'd always want to get a soil test just so you know that when you're putting that lime on, you're not creating a problem by overdoing it. But again, just check yourself on that every once in a while.
Right, and the other thing to add is that you may want to look at the type of species of grass that you're using. Things like perennial rye, Kentucky bluegrass, they do really well in sunny, open areas. And there are other species that do well, not in like dense shade, but handle some of those shady situations a little better. So you may want to look at that species of grass that you're throwing out underneath that tree.
Well, we hope that helps. That can be a real challenge sometimes with moss. So good luck with that. And we have another call coming in, and this is from Judy in Johnstown. Hi, Judy. Thank you for calling. And what can we help you with?
Hi. My question has to do with elderberries. I've been trying to get them established, and I've lost a lot. The deer, I plant them, and the deer eat them, but I'm getting a few established. Are they long-lived? It seems sometimes I'll find some along an area, but then as I go back to check on them, and after years, they disappear. Are they a short-lived plant?
Great question, John. Do you want to field that? An elderberry?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I don't think they are a real long-lived plant, and I've seen the same thing. It's like you'll see patches of them, and then after a few years, they kind of disappear, and you'll see patches someplace else. And when they're growing in the wild like that, the environment is constantly changing, and so I think they're a smaller, say it's like a small tree, and so they're not real competitive when you start to compete with full-size trees, things like that. So often the environment changes; it's out of their favor, and so you'll see them decline.
Tom, any other tips on that?
No, I think John hit it on the head. I've seen them out in the wild, and then they disappear, and it's kind of along the roadways or a break, and it's this idea of succession where you've got the taller trees out competing this smaller vegetation. So I think John was spot on that.
Well, we hope that helps with your question. And we have another call, and this one is from Ted in Pine Grove Mills. Hi, Ted. Thanks for calling. And what can we help you with?
Okay, a number of years ago, I planted some daffodils on the edge of the woods in the back of my backyard, and a small area. I buried a couple of dogs there and put the daffodils there, for commemoration. Anyway, these daffodils have spread about 10 or 15 feet down slope, and also some uphill. And how do daffodils propagate themselves?
Great question, Tom. You want to explain the way a daffodil works? Because you see them spreading sometimes.
Sure, they're just creating more bulbs, and so that's a great way to litter the landscape with more of this of these flowers. Midway through the summer, towards the fall, when that vegetation is done what it's supposed to do, gather that energy, send it down to the bulb for next year's growth. Dig up some of those bulbs, divide them, put some of them back in the original location, and then plant them elsewhere. So it's through asexual propagation.
So that's just their natural way. Other bulbs don't do that, though. I'm thinking of tulips, right? They fade out over time.
Well, so what happens is you've got so much going on underneath the ground, so much bulb formation that they kind of crowd themselves out. And so we do encourage folks over time to alleviate some of that crowding and divide them, either give them away to neighbors or toss them into the compost or whatever. But to maintain that that nice growth, that some of these bulbs are really aggressive in creating more bulbs, that you have to divide them.
Okay, great. Well, we hope that answers your question. And if you're just joining us, I'm Ann Danahy, and this is Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On WPSU. Joining us tonight are Penn State Extension horticulture educators Tom Butzler and John Esslinger. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and we're ready to take your calls. You can also send us questions by email at connect@wpsu.org. So, John, I think you mentioned this a little while ago. It's already starting to be that time when you start looking at the summer vegetables, right? It's a little early for tomatoes and whatnot, but is it a good time to start planning for that?
Yeah, definitely. It's a good time to start preparing, making sure if you're going to add manure, work your manure in, things like that. But what people don't realize is you can plant a tomato plant and maybe it survives and doesn't get frosted, but the plant can be chilled and actually lose yield potential because it was exposed to temperatures, say, at night in the 40s. So we'd like to really put them out when night temperatures especially are warmer, the soil's warmer, they'll hit the ground, they'll take off, and they'll really go. Tomatoes are a tough plant, but still you need to be careful with them. Everybody wants to be that first person to get the tomatoes, but sometimes waiting will get you there just as quick. When you start talking about something like peppers are very unforgiving of stress when they're planting them early in the season. And so, be extra careful with something like a pepper. A lot of people say Memorial Day, and there's some wisdom there. Some of my growers wait until the first week of June to really get their peppers in, just to avoid that stress. So, give them every chance to do well. So don't be in too big of a rush. The way this year is going, I think we're wise to be patient.
Good advice. Okay, we have a question that's come in on email, and this is from Carol. And Carol says, early in the show, Tom mentioned a chemical to kill grass to start a bed. Would you use a strong chemical like that found in Roundup, or is there a generic name?
Yeah, there are generics out there. That's just one of a couple different options, but the product you'd be looking for would contain glyphosate, and that's the active ingredient in Roundup. So if that's what she was asking for.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any concerns with using an herbicide like that?
No, I don't think so. These products have been studied extensively. To get a pesticide label, it has to go through a lot of research. And if it's used according to label, you're using the proper protective equipment, such as gloves, and you may ask you to wear long sleeves or whatever. There should be very little interaction between the applicator and that product. And then once it's on that grass, it's going to do its thing, and then it starts breaking down into different products that are not active on grass or humans or animals.
Okay, great. And we have another question, and this one is from Susan in Zion. Hi, Susan. Thanks for calling. And what can we help you with?
Hi. Well, I have planted grapes, and of course, the first couple of years there wasn't much. And then 2 years ago, I had a good crop, and then last year I had nothing. So I'm wondering what the difference was. And I have a patch of raspberries too, which has gone crazy and is now taking over the whole yard. So they're just little raspberries popping up all through the grass. But anyways, I wanted to ask how to promote the grapes and keep the raspberries from taking over the yard.
Any thoughts on that, John, on grapes?
You experienced the same thing I did. And the difference was that we had a late frost. Last year, my grapes budded out, and they got to be about 3 or 4 inches long. We had a frost. It killed them, and then they resprouted and came back. And instead of having, lots and lots of grapes, maybe there was 1 or 2 handfuls on the entire vine. And there's nothing you did wrong. That grape is probably, again, we had some pretty cold temperatures last week. Hopefully that doesn't hurt too much. But if we get a decent spring, you'll find that you'll have a full crop again. But yes, a lot of people experienced that last year, and I was one of them. And you just kind of take care of them and, keep the pests away, and they'll come back.
Okay, so we hope that helps. And she also had a question too, I think, about the wild berries getting in the grass. Is that something that can be dealt with, or do you just kind of have to go with it?
That's a raspberry. Same thing happened in my garden. You just have to constantly be fighting them back. I mean, that's when they're well taken care of, that's what they're going to do. They're going to put out rhizomes, and they're going to start new plants. And you can be generous. You can just cut some of those off and pull them up and offer them to neighbors and friends and get rid of them that way. But what she's telling me is that she's doing a good job with her plants, and they're happy.
Good way to look at it. Okay, well, we hope that helps. And we have another question, and this one is from Denny in St. Mary's. Hi, Denny. What can we help you with?
Good evening. I've heard different opinions, and I was curious, is it better to plant fruit trees in the fall or in the spring?
Okay, good question. John, do you want to field that one?
Sure. In most of Pennsylvania, you're much better off to do it in the spring. In the fall, I had a grower that put some in the fall, and the reason he wanted to risk it is because he was right along the river in a very protected area, thought it would be okay. What we found was a third died, a third were fine, and a third were halfway in between. And he'll never do that again. In the southeast, maybe where it's warmer winters, you might get by with that, but I wouldn't risk it. I mean, you're gonna spend the money on a fruit tree, put it out early spring, early April is a good time to do that. If you haven't done it and you want to do it now, go ahead and do it, sooner the better. But yes, I think you'll have better success in the spring.
Maybe get some of the rain that we seem to be getting right now too. Yeah. Okay, we have a question. This one came in on email, and it's from Mike in State College. And Mike says, thank you so much for providing this service for gardeners. Do you have any favorite flowering shrubs that do well in central Pennsylvania? Tom, any favorite shrubs?
Yeah, I got a couple. Again, I could take up a whole show, but we'll just briefly talk about two. And these two are native to the U.S. One is Afothogilla, nice flowering, nice flowers in the spring. Looks like a miniature bottle brush, and you get a nice fall color on it, and you do attract several pollinators to that. So it's a kind of a multi-season interest plant. There's a couple different varieties out there. You can get some that are small, some that are larger. And then the other one is a bottle brush Buckeye. Again, these are larger flowers, and they're white midsummer, whereas the Afothogilla was early flowering. The bottlebrush Buckeye is a midsummer flowering, and it really attracts a lot of pollinators, especially the butterflies. So that's kind of a neat one to plant. It does get a little larger, covers a little more of an expansive area. Almost acts like the raspberries that John was talking about, and that it sends up some suckers. So this is not for a small lot or a little corner next to the house. You get it out in the little further out in the landscape.
Somewhere where they can get some free range. John, how about you? Do you have any favorite flowering shrubs?
My favorite, and this is not a shrub, but I just love the eastern redbuds. To me, that's the most beautiful plant we have.
Those are beautiful. I'll put in a word for viburnum. Those are blooming right now, and they're really pretty. Yeah. And we have another call. We have this one from Kay in State College. Hi, Kay. Thanks for calling, and what can we help you with?
I'm sitting here in almost shock, and I was wondering if John might be willing to comment, or the young gentleman that made the statement about glyphosates being all right to spray on things. I mean, I know I'm just I'm not the expert, but I've given 30 years of my life to studying this and reading about it and the cancer risks and the links to neurological diseases in children, and for so long. And I was so shocked when you said something. Is there any alternative we could use to get rid of grass other than glyphosates?
Okay, well, thanks for the question. I know there are differences of opinion on that, but Tom, any thoughts on that and whether there's alternatives?
Well, sure. There are a product that's very similar to vinegar, household vinegar. It's just a little stronger concentrate, acetic acid. Now, that's not going to be systemic, so it will kill everything that it touches, but it won't go down into the roots and kill the root system. But I did kind of mention an alternative to using herbicides, whatever herbicide is mentioned, and that's the use of that black plastic. As soon as we get some sunny days, all you need to do is lay out that black plastic, put some rocks at the corner so that when we get a little bit of wind, it doesn't blow it away. And you just cook that grass, and within a couple days, well, it would take several days, that would do the same thing as some of these herbicides. So yeah, there are a lot of alternatives out there.
Okay, well, great. We hope that answers your question. We have time. We have one more call.
Thank you very much.
We have time for one more call, and this is Jean in Lewisburg. Hi, Jean. Thanks for calling, and what can we help you with?
We have a small raised bed garden. Last year, we planted tomatoes, and it developed a blight. We wondered if we could still plant tomatoes again in that same area, or what could we do?
Okay, great question. John, is it safe to plant the tomatoes in that same spot?
It would really be good to know exactly what disease you had there. There are some diseases like early blight, septoria leaf spot that will actually live on the debris from last year's plants. And so that would be a little bit of a concern. That being said, those diseases are kind of around every year, and it's kind of like when the environment's favorable for them, then they're going to show up. If it was late blight, then late blight does not overwinter here. So you could have a tomato plant die from late blight, plant another one in that same spot next year, and not be any more at risk than any other plant in the rest of the state. So it a little bit depends a little bit on what you had. If you do see something and you start to see some problems, we've got a great program in the Master Gardeners. Union County's got a great Master Gardener program there. Those Master Gardeners, you could take them in a sample that's over in Mifflinburg, and they'd be glad to look at it and identify it for you and help you kind of address whatever it is you have.
Okay, so we hope that helps. And we have just a minute or so left. Tom, any last thoughts, takeaways for people watching and listening tonight?
I think you kind of already addressed this, Ann, that go out and garden. It's a great way to relieve some of the stress, get some exercise, interact with the kids, or maybe not interact with them, just get out away from them. But it's a good hobby. So, yes.
Great advice. Thanks, John. Any parting suggestions?
I agree with Tom. It's therapy, and do a little research. Take the time. Right now we've got these rainy days. Do a little research. find out what conditions your plants do the best in, set them up for success, and you'll all be happy.
Where would you suggest people go for research? Does Penn State Extension have some good sites?
There's a ton of information on the Penn State Extension website. I mean, just pretty much any topic you want to investigate, it's there, and it's Pennsylvania information, so you know that it's relevant to our area. Yeah, and we have a lot of, there are some different manuals, things like that for gardening. Tom mentioned the program with the Victory Gardens. There's a lot of resources that Extension has, and utilize those. And there's other resources also. But again, just educate yourself, set your garden up so that it's gonna be successful.
Yeah, you mentioned we were having a little bit of rainy weather, so now would be a perfect time to start planting for later in May when you can get the tomatoes and those other veggies in late May, early June. Thank you both, Tom Butzler and John Esslinger, so much for coming in and talking with us.
Thank you, Ann.
Our guests tonight have been Extension educators John Esslinger and Tom Butzler. I'm Ann Danahy. Thank you for being here, and please join us on our next episode of Conversations Live, Speaking Grief on May 21st.